We had just moved into this fancy new apartment complex, one of those high-end buildings with a fancy name, polished floors, and views that made everything feel brand new. Sarah was so excited about the place, acting like it was the fresh start we both needed. I mean, she kept saying things like, "This is going to be the best chapter of our lives," like it was all going to fix everything. I thought it would too. At least, that's what I hoped. After all, we'd been married for 6 years. Maybe a change of scenery would get us back on track. But things didn't quite go as planned. I could feel it, you know? Something wasn't right. Sarah had changed. We had changed. The woman I'd married, the one who used to want to talk about our day over dinner, the one who would get excited about little things, was slipping away. She wasn't home much anymore, and when she wasn't present. Like her mind was somewhere else. When I tried to talk to her, it felt like she was just going through the motions. It wasn't anger or bitterness. It was like I didn't even exist in her world. I kept asking her, trying to get her to open up, but all she'd do is brush me off. "I'm just busy, Mark," she'd say, or "You're overthinking it." That was Sarah's go-to when she didn't want to deal with something. Overthinking. Like I was the crazy one for noticing the shift. To be honest, I couldn't put my finger on it at first. Maybe it was work stress, or the pressure of the move. Maybe I wasn't giving her enough attention. But it wasn't just me. I could tell she wasn't happy, and no amount of me trying to be there for her seemed to help. I didn't know what was missing, but whatever it was, I couldn't fix it. Then came Jake. Jake was this guy who worked in the building. Young, mid-20s, good-looking in that cocky, I know I'm hot kind of way. He was the window washer, always wearing that jumpsuit with his name tag, swinging from one floor to the next. I'd see him around the building, and sometimes, I'd wave. But Sarah was the one who started talking to him first. At first, it seemed harmless, just pleasantries, small talk. But I noticed something odd. She'd laugh a little too hard at his jokes, smile a little too brightly when he was around. And every time he came by to clean the windows, she'd somehow end up standing by the window, talking to him for longer than she should have. I didn't think much of it at the time. Maybe it was just one of those friendly neighborhood things, right? But one day, I came home early from work. The door to our apartment was cracked open, and I didn't think anything of it. But when I walked in, there she was. Sarah, standing in the kitchen, laughing with Jake. He was leaning against the counter, one arm casually thrown across it, all relaxed, like he'd been there 100 times. I could feel this weird, tense energy in the air, something I couldn't explain. I'd never seen her so alive around anyone like that before. She jumped when she saw me. "Oh, Mark, you're home early. I didn't think you'd be back until later." I nodded, my stomach twisting. Jake gave me a quick nod, but I could see the way he looked at Sarah. There was this familiarity in his eyes, something deeper than just being a neighbor. "I was just helping Sarah with a window issue," Jake said with a smirk, looking between us. I didn't buy it. There was no window issue. The whole thing was off. But I didn't say anything. I just gave him a stiff smile and told him to have a good day. He left with that same cocky grin, not giving me a second glance as he walked out. But Sarah didn't seem to notice. She was already turning back to the counter, trying to act normal, but I saw the way her face shifted when she thought I wasn't looking. She was hiding something. But I didn't say a word. Not yet. I figured I'd just wait, see where things went from there. But deep down, something told me this wasn't going to be as simple as a harmless flirtation. I didn't know what it was, but I could feel it. The next few weeks were a blur of fake smiles and half-hearted conversations. Sarah kept pulling away, and Jake kept hanging around. It was like I was watching my wife slip through my fingers without any way to stop it. And I didn't even know where to begin. Then one day, I found something that made it all too real. But that's a story for later. It wasn't until I started noticing the little things that I began to really put it all together. I'm not stupid, and as much as Sarah tried to play it cool, there were clues everywhere. The first real red flag was her phone. She was always so protective of it. More than usual. She'd leave it on the kitchen counter, and the second I'd get close, she'd grab it and hide it away, like I was about to peek at something that wasn't mine. At first, I tried to dismiss it. People get funny about their phones, right? But the more she did it, the more I started to feel uneasy. And the late nights. She'd be out with friends, supposedly, but when I asked who they were, the answers didn't add up. I was raised to trust my partner. I never thought I'd be the kind of guy to spy or invade someone's privacy. But when the gut feeling settles in, you can't ignore it, no matter how hard you try. So, one night, when she was getting ready to go out, I found myself staring at her phone on the table. She had left it unattended for a minute, and I had a choice to make. Walk away and ignore the nagging feeling in my chest, or take a look and confront what I already suspected. I chose the latter. The moment I unlocked her phone, I felt this weird coldness wash over me. It wasn't even the texts that hit me, it was the messages from Jake. His name was all over it, sending her things at odd hours. Messages about nothing, just words that seemed meaningless but felt different, like a language only the two of them shared. There were photos, too. Pictures she'd taken in the apartment, selfies, and some of her at events, but with Jake always in the background. Sometimes, they'd look so close, too close, like she didn't care if I saw. I should have felt angry. Maybe part of me did. But mostly I felt sick. Like I was seeing the truth, and I couldn't unsee it. The part that hurt the most, though, was the realization that she was hiding it from me. She knew what she was doing was wrong, and yet she kept doing it. I didn't want to know more. I didn't want to see any more of the messages, but it was like I couldn't stop myself. My eyes scanned the conversations, looking for patterns, trying to figure out when this had started, how deep it went, and if she'd ever been honest with me in the first place. There were no clear admissions, no confessions, but there didn't need to be. The flirtations, the inside jokes, the plans to meet up, it was all there. I closed her phone and put it back exactly where I found it. I didn't confront her that night. I couldn't. What would I even say? How could I even begin to process the fact that my wife, the woman I thought I knew, was carrying on an affair right under my nose? That was the first time I thought about what I might do next. I had always believed in love, in loyalty, in keeping things between two people. But now, I felt like an outsider in my own home. The anger was there, but so was this overwhelming sadness, like I'd been betrayed in a way I couldn't even put into words. It wasn't just about Jake anymore. It was about her. About Sarah, the woman who had promised me everything and now seemed to be drifting away from me with no intention of coming back. The next few days were a blur. I tried to act normal, tried to pretend like everything was fine, but I could see it in her eyes. She knew I knew. She didn't say anything, of course. Sarah was never the confrontational type. She was good at playing the part, at pretending everything was okay, but the guilt was written all over her face. She had become so good at lying, at hiding the truth, and now it was like she was just waiting for me to confront her about it. And the worst part? Part of me wanted to do it. Part of me wanted to scream, to ask her how long she thought she could keep this up, but another part of me knew I wasn't ready for the truth yet. Not fully. But soon, I couldn't ignore it anymore. That weekend, I had the chance to confront her, and it happened in a way I never saw coming. It didn't take long before Jake became a regular presence in our lives. He was always there, cleaning windows, showing up with that cocky grin and a swagger in his step. At first, it didn't seem like much. I mean, he was just doing his job, right? But then I started noticing how Sarah acted around him. It was subtle at first, a smile that lingered too long, a laugh that sounded too genuine for someone she barely knew. They'd talk when I wasn't around, just casual exchanges. But I could tell. You know how you can feel when someone's got a spark for someone else, even when they're trying to hide it. That's what I felt when I saw them together. She'd act like everything was fine when I was around, but there was this energy in the air whenever Jake was near. It was like I wasn't even there sometimes. I tried to brush it off at first. Maybe I was being paranoid. Maybe it was just me reading too much into things. But every time he came around, I couldn't help but feel like I was being shoved aside, like I wasn't the one getting her attention anymore. She was too busy talking to him, laughing at his jokes. And then there was that one day. I was home early from work, and as soon as I walked into the apartment, I saw them in the kitchen. He was leaning against the counter, looking way too comfortable in our space, while Sarah stood there, smiling and chatting like she had all the time in the world. There was no reason for it. No reason why Jake needed to be in our kitchen at that hour. It was just wrong. But instead of saying something right there, I just stayed quiet, my stomach twisting. I greeted him coldly, barely acknowledging his presence, and watched him walk out the door. Sarah didn't even notice. She was already turning back to what she was doing, like nothing had happened. But something had. And it didn't take much for me to realize it wasn't just Jake she was getting close to. It was the excitement, the attention, the feeling of something new that had been missing from our marriage. The more I saw Sarah with him, the clearer it became. It wasn't about Jake. It wasn't even about their conversations or his flirtations. It was about the way Sarah had stopped seeing me, the way she was searching for something outside of our relationship that I couldn't give her anymore. And worse, she was finding it in him. I didn't know what to do with that. I could feel the shift in her, But how do you confront something when you're not even sure it's real yet? I knew something was happening, but it was like a slow burn, a creeping sense of distance that I couldn't ignore anymore. So, I kept watching. I kept quiet. But I also knew I couldn't keep pretending. Not anymore. It all came to a head one night when Sarah left her phone on the kitchen counter. I don't know why I picked it up. Maybe I was just curious. Maybe I was looking for an excuse to confront her. But as soon as I unlocked it, I felt this strange coldness wash over me. I wasn't ready for what I was about to see, but I couldn't stop myself. It was like something inside me knew, and I had to know too. Her messages with Jake were everywhere. It wasn't just one or two texts. It was the frequency, the casual intimacy in the words. They had this rhythm, inside jokes, messages sent late at night, pictures of her smiling, looking so carefree, like she hadn't a care in the world. There were photos of her taken around the apartment, ones I'd never seen, but they weren't just pictures. They were moments. Moments she was sharing with Jake, moments that were supposed to be mine to witness. The worst part wasn't even the texts, it was the way she had kept this from me. I'd felt it for a while, that something wasn't right, but this was proof. This was confirmation. She hadn't just been distant. She'd been involved. She'd let herself be involved. With someone we both knew. Jake. The guy I'd seen around the building, the guy who had been a stranger just months ago, now seemed to have his hands all over my wife's life. The messages weren't explicit, but the connection was clear. They were spending time together, meeting up when I wasn't home, sending texts that were far too personal, far too familiar. She hadn't just gotten caught up in a moment. She'd been choosing this. And the worst part? She wasn't even trying to hide it. I sat there, staring at the screen for what felt like forever, my hands cold, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't know what to do with this. I didn't know how to even feel. The anger wasn't immediate. It was a slow burn, this overwhelming sense of betrayal that didn't make me lash out, but made me want to curl up and disappear. I put the phone back where I found it, like nothing had happened, like I hadn't just discovered everything I needed to know. I didn't want to confront her. Not yet. It wasn't that I didn't feel hurt, because I did. It was just that part of me wasn't ready to face her. Not like this. I didn't want to see her deny it, to lie her way through it. I needed time to think. But time was something I wasn't going to give her much of anymore. The next few days, I went about my routine, acting like nothing had changed. But it had. Everything had changed. I was walking around in a fog, pretending everything was normal while I was dying inside. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't eat. Every time I looked at her, I saw Jake. I saw their laughter, their secrets. She knew I knew. I could see it in the way she acted around me. Too careful, too guarded. But she didn't say anything. She wouldn't admit it. Not yet. I didn't want to wait anymore. I couldn't. I wasn't sure what I was going to do, but I knew one thing. I wasn't going to just sit there and let it slide. I wasn't going to pretend. Not when I'd already seen the truth. Soon enough, she'd have to face what I knew. And when that moment came, it was going to change everything. The next few days felt like a blur. It was like I was walking around in a fog, knowing something I wasn't ready to say out loud. Sarah seemed to sense the shift, but neither of us was ready to address it. She kept up her usual routine, leaving for work, running errands, acting like everything was fine. But every time she walked past me, I could feel this wall between us. I could feel the guilt in her eyes, even if she wouldn't admit it. I didn't know how to approach her. Part of me wanted to confront her, to demand answers, but another part of me wasn't ready for the full force of the truth. I didn't want to hear her excuses, didn't want to watch her lie to my face. So, I kept quiet. But in keeping quiet, I was slowly suffocating. I thought maybe I was overreacting. Maybe I was just being paranoid, letting my insecurities get the best of me. I tried to convince myself that I was wrong, that maybe this was all in my head. Maybe she was just distant because of work, or the stress of the move. But deep down, I knew I couldn't ignore it anymore. I kept thinking back to that night. Her phone on the counter, the texts, the photos. That gut-wrenching feeling that told me everything I needed to know. It was like a weight pressing down on my chest, one I couldn't shake off no matter how hard I tried. When Sarah came home that evening, I didn't say anything. I acted like everything was normal. I made dinner, we ate in silence, and I went to bed pretending like I wasn't dying inside. I kept replaying the messages in my mind, the way she looked at Jake, the way she smiled at him. I could almost hear their laughter, even though I wasn't there to witness it. But the more I tried to bury it, the more it consumed me. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't focus. Every moment felt like I was suffocating under the weight of something that should have been addressed long ago. The anger was building, but I wasn't ready to let it out yet. I wasn't ready to confront her. Not until I had my plan in place. The truth was starting to sink in, piece by piece. Sarah wasn't just a little distant. She wasn't just busy with life. She had chosen this. Chosen Jake. And every time she pretended like everything was fine, it felt like a slap in the face. She had made her choice, and I couldn't keep pretending like I didn't know. But I wasn't ready to forgive her. Not yet. Not until she faced what she had done. And that was the hardest part. To sit in this uncertainty, to wait for the moment when I would finally make her face the reality of what was happening. It didn't take long for the tension to build into something unmanageable. I could feel it in the air, the way Sarah avoided looking me in the eye, how she always seemed a little too busy to talk when I tried to reach out. We were living in the same space but somehow not even in the same world. The distance between us wasn't just physical anymore. It was emotional, and it was killing me. One night, she told me she was going out with some friends, just a casual thing. I didn't question it. I'd learned to trust her, or at least I used to, but something in her voice, the way she said it, struck me. There was a hesitation, something that didn't sit right with me. Maybe I had finally reached the point where I was just too tired of pretending, or maybe I was just so fed up with the lies that I couldn't ignore the instinct anymore. I decided to follow her. Not to spy, exactly, but just to see where she was really going. I hadn't asked for this. She had made me feel crazy for even wondering, for even thinking something was off, but now I had to know. I had to know if I was losing my mind or if I was losing her. I drove around the block and parked a few cars away from the bar she was supposed to be meeting her friends at. I didn't expect to see what I did next. When Sarah walked into the bar, she wasn't alone. There was Jake, right behind her, that familiar smirk on his face, looking more than comfortable with her. They weren't just talking. They were together, walking side by side, laughing like they didn't have a care in the world. The world I thought we had built together, the one I thought I could trust, had vanished. I sat there for what felt like hours, just watching them. My heart twisted in my chest, and that cold, empty feeling settled over me again. They didn't even notice me. They didn't have to. I wasn't even part of their reality anymore. She had made it so clear without saying a word. She didn't even know I was watching. She didn't know that I knew everything. But she would. I didn't go inside that night. I didn't have to. The betrayal was already clear. I didn't say anything when Sarah came home later. I acted normal, like I had been all along, but inside, I was screaming. I didn't know if I was angrier with her or myself for letting it go on this long. How had I not seen it? How had I let it happen? She knew I knew, though. I could see it in the way she looked at me, like she was waiting for me to say something. But I wasn't going to make it easy for her. No. I wasn't going to play the fool. I wasn't going to let her lie her way through this. She had crossed a line, and now it was my turn to take control. But I didn't confront her that night. I couldn't. I didn't know if I was ready to hear the lies she would tell, the excuses she would make. I wasn't sure I was ready for that. But I was ready to make her face it. Tomorrow would be the day. Tomorrow, I was going to make sure she understood exactly what she had done. I had to. For me, for us, for everything she had destroyed. The next morning, I couldn't pretend anymore. I couldn't keep walking around like nothing had happened. I didn't care if I wasn't ready to hear it, if I wasn't prepared for her lies. I had to confront her. There was no more hiding, no more pretending. When she came into the kitchen, I was already sitting there, waiting. The moment she walked in, I could feel the shift in the air. She froze for a second, like she knew what was coming, but she said nothing. She went about making her coffee, like she wasn't about to be confronted with the fact that I knew everything. "Sarah," I said, my voice cold but steady. "We need to talk." She paused, just for a second, and then kept moving, like she was trying to act normal. But she couldn't hide the tension in her shoulders, the way her hands shook just a little when she reached for the sugar. "What's going on, Mark?" she asked, the words coming out too quickly. She was trying to sound calm, but I could hear the nervous edge in her voice. "Why are you so tense?" I didn't waste time. I didn't want to hear her dodging around the issue, playing coy. I needed her to hear me, really hear me, and understand that I wasn't going to let this slide. "I know about you and Jake," I said flatly. She went pale, and for a split second, I thought she might break down right there. But instead, she straightened up, a defensive look crossing her face. "What do you mean, you know about Jake?" she asked, her voice growing more guarded. "This is ridiculous, Mark. Why would you?" "Don't lie to me, Sarah," I interrupted, my voice cutting through the air. "I saw you last night. With him. Don't try to play dumb. I know everything." Her face twisted in disbelief, like she was trying to act shocked that I knew. But I could see it in her eyes. She wasn't surprised. She had been waiting for this moment. She had been waiting for me to finally catch on. "Mark, listen," she began, her tone shifting, trying to soften. "It's not what you think. I wasn't trying to hurt you. It just happened. I didn't feel like you were there anymore. You were always distant, and Jake made me feel seen again." I was too far gone to be swayed by her excuses. I was too angry to let her off easy. "No, Sarah," I said, my voice a little louder now, "you didn't just feel seen. You let this happen. You chose it. You chose him. And the worst part is, you thought I wouldn't notice, or that I wouldn't care." Her face flushed with guilt, but she didn't back down. She was still trying to justify herself. "I never meant to hurt you," she said, her voice shaking. "It was just something I needed. I didn't know how to tell you. I thought we were fine, but we weren't. Stop," I cut her off. "Stop with the excuses. You were sneaking around behind my back, Sarah. You were lying to me, pretending everything was okay, and you knew it. You were living a whole other life without me. And now you want me to feel sorry for you." She opened her mouth to say something, but then she closed it, realizing that nothing she could say was going to change what I knew. She was cornered. She was caught. The silence between us hung heavy. She stared at me, her eyes searching for any trace of softness, any hint that I might forgive her. But there was nothing there. Nothing but the cold, hard truth. I wasn't going to forgive this. Not yet. Not after everything. I stood up, my mind made up. "I'm done talking about it." "We're done talking about it," I said, my voice firm. "I've heard enough. Now, you're going to face the consequences of your actions. You don't get to hide from this anymore." Her face drained of color, and for the first time in a long while, I saw a flicker of fear in her eyes. She knew she had lost me, and I was just getting started. After the confrontation, things got quiet. Too quiet. It was like we were walking on eggshells, both of us knowing something had shifted irreparably. But I wasn't just going to let it go. I wasn't going to let Sarah off the hook just because she'd admitted it. I'd spent too many sleepless nights questioning myself, wondering if I had missed the signs, if I had been too blind to see what was right in front of me. She needed to understand exactly what she had done, and how badly it had messed with everything I thought was real. So, I did something I didn't think I'd ever be capable of. I started planning. Not just to leave, not just to walk away from the wreckage she had made of our marriage, but to make her feel it. To make her face the consequences of her actions in a way that would break her, the same way she had broken me. I wasn't just going to hurt her for the affair. I was going to strip her of the things she took for granted. Her sense of security, her comfort, her control over this relationship. The things she destroyed by throwing herself into Jake's arms without a second thought. The first step. I started pulling away. I wasn't going to make it obvious at first. I was still living in the apartment, still going through the motions of being her husband, but emotionally? I shut myself off. I stopped sharing things with her. I stopped asking her how her day was, how she was feeling. When she came home late, I didn't say anything. When she asked me if I was okay, I just nodded and went back to whatever I was doing. It felt like a game at first, seeing how long I could keep this up, how long it would take for her to notice the shift. But it didn't take long. The first night I didn't touch her when she came to bed. I saw the panic in her eyes. She didn't say anything, but I could feel the way she tensed up, the way she tried to act like it didn't bother her. But it did. And I was just getting started. Next, I started changing my routine. I used to leave work early, go home, ask her what she wanted to do. But now, I stayed late at the office, went out for drinks with friends she didn't know, did anything I could to distance myself. I wasn't going to let her have the illusion that she still had control over me. She had taken control of this marriage, and now it was my turn to make her feel what it was like to lose it. One evening, I didn't come home at all. I sent a simple text, "Working late. Don't wait up." It was small, but it was enough. I didn't answer her calls, didn't respond to her messages. I stayed out late, and when I came back, I pretended like nothing had changed. But she was a mess. I could tell by the way she looked at me, wide-eyed, desperate, but too proud to admit it. I knew she was feeling the cold distance I had put between us, the sudden lack of emotional support that had once been her constant. She tried to talk to me again, the next day. I could see it in the way she looked at me. Guilty, apologetic, but also, strangely, a little angry. She wanted to fix things, wanted to know what I needed. But she didn't know what I needed. She had lost that right when she chose Jake. "Mark," she said that evening, sitting next to me on the couch, her voice trembling. "I know you're hurt, and I don't blame you for being upset. But we can fix this. We can go to therapy, we can make it work. Please, just tell me what you need from me. I'll do whatever it takes." I looked at her, feeling nothing but a deep, gnawing emptiness. "What I need," I repeated, my voice icy. "What I need is for you to understand what you've done. I need you to realize that you can't just walk away from this and expect everything to go back to normal. I need you to feel what I feel, to see how badly you've destroyed everything." She started to argue, but I could tell it was pointless. She had no idea how to fix it, and I wasn't interested in fixing anything. Not yet. Not until she truly understood the gravity of what she had done. I wasn't just taking space anymore. I was taking control. Every decision I made, every action I took, was a reminder to her of the power she had lost. This was going to be her reckoning, and I wasn't going to make it easy on her. I didn't care how long it took. I wasn't walking away, but I wasn't going to make it easy, either. Every day, I was going to make her feel the weight of what she had done, and it would break her down, piece by piece, until she understood exactly how much she had betrayed me. And when it was over, she would have nothing left. No apologies, no excuses, just the consequences of her choices. The days started to blur together, but I was getting what I wanted. Sarah was unraveling. It wasn't a dramatic collapse, nothing explosive, no yelling matches or public scenes. No, it was subtler than that. I didn't need to tear her down all at once. I was breaking her slowly, little by little, like a slow burn. She started trying harder, not in a way that felt genuine, but in the way someone does when they realize they're losing everything. She made more effort to talk to me, ask how my day was, try to be affectionate. But I saw through it. I could see that she was trying to patch things up with band-aids instead of truly addressing the damage she had caused. She wasn't sorry. She was just afraid of losing control. I ignored her attempts. When she'd sit down beside me, put her hand on my arm, I'd pull away. If she tried to kiss me, I'd turn my head. If she asked if I wanted to talk, I'd just shake my head. I was cold. But I had to be. If I gave her any of that back, she'd think she could fix this without really having to face what she'd done. She needed to feel what it was like to be completely alone in this mess, to realize that no matter how many times she apologized, no matter how many promises she made, she couldn't undo the betrayal. She started staying home more, too. The nights out with her friends became fewer. I don't know if she was scared of running into Jake or if she realized she didn't have the right to be out there, enjoying herself when she had torn our life apart. But I didn't care what her reasons were. I wasn't interested in her guilt or her attempts at atonement. The only thing that mattered now was that she understood the depth of her actions. That every moment she spent in that apartment, surrounded by the life she had once taken for granted, would be a reminder of her choices. Then one night, she came home late. Too late, and she was a little tipsy, trying to act casual about it. I could tell she had been drinking, but I didn't care. I knew what she was doing. She'd been trying to call Jake again, probably a few too many times. She came into the apartment, stumbling just a little, and when she saw me sitting there in the living room, she smiled like everything was fine, like she was still the woman who had my love and trust. But I wasn't playing that game anymore. "I'm home late," she said, her voice a little too sweet. "I'm sorry, I lost track of time. It's just that, I had a lot to catch up on with the girls." I didn't look up. I didn't need to hear her excuses. Instead, I stood up, walked over to the window, and looked out over the city. I didn't acknowledge her at first, just let the silence hang heavy between us. When I finally turned to face her, I couldn't help the sharpness in my voice. "So, tell me," I said slowly, "how's Jake? Is he the one you lost track of time with?" Her face went white. Her hands, which had been busy straightening out her jacket, froze. I didn't need to see it to know what was going on in her mind. The guilt was written all over her face. She knew that I knew everything, that I had known for days. But she didn't expect me to actually call her out on it. Not like this. "Mark," she said, stepping forward. "Please, you don't understand. It's not like that. I'm sorry, I don't know what I was thinking." I interrupted her, voice rising. "No, Sarah. You made your choices. Don't try to explain them away, don't try to make them sound like a mistake. You didn't just slip up. You decided. Over and over again, you chose him. You chose to lie to me, to lie to yourself. She flinched, but I could see her fighting it. Her eyes were welling up, and she took a shaky breath. I never meant to hurt you, she whispered. But I wasn't interested in her tears. I didn't want her regret. Not yet, at least. Yeah, well, you did, I said coldly. You hurt me more than you'll ever understand. And I'm not just going to forget it. So don't expect me to be the husband you want right now. Don't expect me to forgive you, not when you're still going behind my back. I'm done pretending. I walked past her, heading toward the bedroom. But before I stepped inside, I turned back to look at her one last time. I'm done being your fool, Sarah. And I'm done pretending like everything can just go back to normal. She stood there, staring at me, and for the first time, I saw that she didn't have any answers. She didn't know how to fix this. She didn't have control anymore. I did. The silence that followed felt final. It wasn't just the silence of an argument or a cold shoulder. It was the silence of the last thread of our marriage snapping. The days that followed were suffocating. I could feel Sarah trying to hold on, desperately seeking any way to fix things. She'd leave me notes on the kitchen counter, text me apologies in the middle of the day, even show up with flowers, thinking that would somehow erase the damage. But it wasn't about flowers or notes. It wasn't about saying sorry. It was about the trust that had been shattered beyond repair. The way she had looked me in the eye for months, telling me everything was fine, while secretly she was sleeping with someone else. That wasn't something you could just patch up with a few nice gestures. It ran deeper than that, and Sarah was beginning to realize that. She started to retreat into herself, unable to face me without feeling the weight of what she'd done. The silence between us grew louder, like a wall I couldn't climb over. I could see her losing the grip on her life, on us. She didn't know how to navigate the wreckage she had caused. And it didn't matter. She had made her choices, and now she was left to live with them. One evening, after a week of barely speaking, she asked if we could talk. I didn't know what was left to say, but I agreed. We sat in the living room, both of us stiff, both of us on edge, trying not to acknowledge the suffocating tension. I don't know what to do anymore, Mark, she said, her voice barely a whisper. I know I've messed up, but I want to fix it. I need to fix it. I'll do anything. I can't lose you. She was pleading, but there was no sincerity left in her words. It was desperation, not love. The truth was, I had already checked out. I wasn't the same person who had married her. The man who once loved her without question, who trusted her completely, was gone. And it wasn't her apology or her promises that could bring him back. You don't get it, I said quietly, not even looking at her. You can't fix this with words, Sarah. You can't fix this with promises or guilt. You've already done the worst thing you could do. You broke something in me that can't be repaired. And no matter how many times you tell me you're sorry, it's not going to change what happened. Her face crumpled. I saw the tears well up in her eyes, but I didn't feel sympathy anymore. It was like I had become numb to her sadness. This was her doing. She had forced me into this position. I don't know how to fix it either, she said, voice breaking. I just want us to go back to how we were. It's too late for that, I said, the words heavy and final. I met her eyes for the first time in days, and I saw a mix of anger, sadness, and regret all at once. The person you betrayed. He's not here anymore. And he's never coming back. I stood up, turning my back to her as I headed toward the bedroom. She didn't follow me, but I could hear her sobbing softly from the other room. Part of me felt something. Regret, maybe, but it wasn't for her. It was for the man I used to be. For the life we had that was gone now, never to return. I spent the next few days making small changes. Nothing big, nothing she'd notice immediately, but I started securing my independence. I changed the passwords on my accounts, started looking into my own options for moving out. There was no point in staying in a place that felt like a prison anymore. It was time for me to leave, to find some space where I could breathe again, without the weight of her betrayal hanging over me. The final straw came a few days later when she finally admitted she had tried to reach out to Jake again. She had texted him that morning, asking if they could talk. She wasn't asking for anything more, just trying to get closure, she claimed. But I didn't care about her closure anymore. That was it for me. I couldn't sit in that apartment, in that life, pretending like we were still living the same existence. She wasn't the woman I had married, and I wasn't the man she thought I was. I packed a bag that night, ready to leave the next morning. When I told her, She didn't fight me. She didn't beg me to stay. She just looked at me, hollow and defeated, and I saw the last flicker of hope in her die. "You're really leaving," she whispered, as if she couldn't believe it was happening. "I'm done, Sarah," I said, my voice low but firm. "You don't get to keep everything. You don't get to break me and walk away like it's nothing." Her shoulders slumped as she sat down on the couch, the weight of it all settling on her. And as I walked out the door, I felt the finality of it. I had nothing left to give. There was nothing to fix anymore. I wasn't going back, not for anything. The apartment felt too big, too empty, as I drove away, but I knew that this was the only way forward. The consequences of her choices had caught up with her. And now, she had to face them.